We're recording.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining today's seminar of NCCAV Center. So, as you may know, NCCAV seminars are commonly on the last Friday of the month. If you have missed any of the past seminars, the recordings are already available in the websites, and you can take a look. And we're also going to be having several interesting talks as we move forward. I would like to thank the sponsors of the project, North Carolina Department of Transportation, which enables us to conduct this exciting research at NCCAV Center, as well as the gold sponsors, Downtown Greensboro, Verizon, and RTI. And for today's talk, we do have Dr. Stephen Jiang as the speaker. Today's title of the talk is Impact of Automated, Connected, Electric, and Shared Vehicles on Transportation Revenue Collection. A little bit about Dr. Jiang. He's an associate professor in the Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering at North Carolina A&T State University. His research interests include visual analytics and human systems integrations. He completed his Bachelor of Science in Mechanical and Electronic Control from East China Institute of Technology. His Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering and Electronic Control from Nanjing University of Science and Technology, and his PhD in Industrial Engineering from Clemson University. With that, I would like to invite Dr. Jiang for today's talk. The scene is yours. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you. Just give me a second. All right. Thanks, Ali. Thanks for the nice introduction. My name is Stephen Jiang. I'm working on the Thruster 1 of the Transportation Center. And this specific project I'm working on is the revenue, the impact of the CAVs. So today, I'm going to just talk about what we have found so far. A little bit about the schedule. So for this particular task, currently our main task is to conduct a literature review and prepare for building the models in the next step. Our model building activities will start in December this year. So mainly what I'm going to report today is what we found from the literature and our thoughts so far in terms of what we're going to do to study the impact on the revenue. So we all know automated vehicles basically use technology to steer, accelerate, and brake with little to no human input. Some vehicles still require some kind of like assistance from the human to monitor the roadways, while some other vehicles will require no human intervention at all. Connected vehicles use technology to either communicate with each other or connect with the traffic signal signs or other road items, or just simply obtain data from a cloud. The information exchange will help with safety and improve traffic flow. So that's a little bit of background of it. Now, so in general, CAV can bring some benefits to us. For instance, the travel time can be saved, and it can be improved safety because human errors can be reduced. And it can offer a more enjoyable travel experience because humans don't have to drive that much, so you don't have to pay attention to what's going on the road, so you can have a more enjoyable travel experience. And the insurance costs can be lower because there will be fewer accidents, especially for those who have mobility issues or elderly or disabled people. Now they can enjoy a ride. The potential to shift the permanent car ownership to an on-demand paradigm will reduce overall user cost to operating a vehicle. So in the long term, if the adoption of CAVs becomes more popular, and people might not need own a private vehicle, instead there could be some kind of on-demand paradigm. So overall, this can reduce the cost to just operating or ride a vehicle. The potential to drastically reduce the human costs from car accidents and the economic impact of the losses. So the CAV will have a significant impact on the way we live. So, a couple of things. One is the accidents we can see, because humans are less involved in driving. So therefore, the potential.
Cisco, you know, any new one.
I assume that's not talking to me, right?
No, if everybody.
Okay, so car accidents can be incidences will be reduced, but unfortunately, with the adoption of CAV, they also will have some negative impact, specifically for the revenues for the state and local government, because despite the benefits of CAV, the shift to CAV technology may result in transportation revenue losses to states and the local governments, and will have enormous impact on their budgets. Specifically, CAVs will have considerable impact on state and local revenues related to motor vehicles, including those gas taxes, exercise taxes, parking fees, traffic violation fees, vehicle impound fees, and vehicle registration fees. In addition, the CAV technology will change the way we drive, and that will lead to economic impacts, including the congestion and air pollution costs. So in the short term, if you have the adoption of combustion engine kind of a vehicle CAVs, then you can expect that there will be more cars on the road that will increase the congestion and also increase the air pollution. Now, in the long term, with the electric vehicles adopted, things could be a different story. Gas taxes definitely will increase with more like vehicle miles traveled, which is a measure, because there are more vehicles on the road. Then there are more miles traveled per vehicle, so gas tax could increase. This is again assuming we're not considering the widely adopted electric vehicle, which is talking about the gas. Exercise taxes, the revenue can be expected to increase in the short term as well, with a largely private fleet, because they increase the vehicles, therefore you can see an increase there. However, if the vehicles are not like shared, that's what we say, private fleet. However, if the vehicles mostly are shared, then the extra taxes actually will drop because you have fewer vehicle purchases. Parking fees will decrease. These revenues, including the paying to park, permit fees, and violations, will all fall in the short term. Now, cities could do something. Cities could make changes by redevelopment, how the parking area in the long term. So in general, there are two trends we can expect. The first is with the adoption of CAV, the vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, will increase. And the second trend is there will be a decrease in demand for parking. We mentioned a significant increase could occur in terms of congestion because more vehicles on the road. And predicted increase in vehicle miles traveled, including lower per mile vehicle costs. And we mentioned some other benefits of greater access to cars for people who have disabilities. And now people can enjoy a long ride, as those are the benefit of it. So we also mentioned the demand for parking will decrease because autonomous vehicles park more efficiently, or they do not need parking at all. So those are some of the things we we found. Now here is sort of like a graphical way to showcase what could happen and the impact on the economy. So from here, for instance, if we have 20% of private internal combustion engine vehicles, those are not electric vehicles, and the impact on the congestion, it will increase because you have more vehicles on the road. For collisions, it will improve moderately. And in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, it will increase with more vehicles miles. And here again, we're talking about those are combustion engine vehicles. And local and regional air pollution will also increase because more cars on the road. Then if we consider 100% of private internal combustion engine vehicles, again, those are gas consumptive vehicles, congestions will increase with more vehicle on the road and more vehicle miles. And you see the red X there, that indicates there will be a large economic impact. And the blue with the check indicating a large economic benefit. So in terms of collision, it will improve significantly because we mentioned there are less human involved, so there will be less accidents. And greenhouse gas emission obviously will be increases significantly because there are more cars on the road, and so on and so forth. And then the bottom, you have a mixture of the ride sharing with the electric vehicles. For instance, if you have 20% of ride sharing, electric vehicle, ride sharing, basically people ride in the same vehicle. In terms of congestion, increase with more vehicles miles, somewhat offset by ride pooling because there are more and more people ride together, so that kind of compensate on the number of vehicles. And in terms of collision, improve moderately, and greenhouse decrease because of the electric vehicle technology and ride pooling. And in terms of air pollution, it will also decrease, again, because of the electric vehicle adoption and the ride pooling. That's we're considering there are 20% of ride sharing electric vehicles. When we increase that percentage to 100%, as you can see, the impact on congestion, collision, greenhouse gas emission, and local and regional air pollution are different. So this is sort of like one way to look at how the adoption of CAVs and type of vehicles can have impact on different aspects of the transportation. So one of the article written by Bansal and Nockeman, they conducted a research to forecast the long-term adoption of CAV. Their approach was based on simulation. First of all, they conducted a nationwide survey, and they distributed this survey in June 2015 using Quadrex, the web-based survey tool. And based on the feedback, they actually received 2,868 surveys. So 2,868 Americans complete the survey. And some of the surveys are incomplete or with various issues. So after filtering those responses, they end up with 2,167 responses. Now, this graph shows you the respondents where they're located. As you probably noticed that a majority or large cluster of respondents are actually residing in Texas. So to be specific, about 1,364 were Texans. So the sample overrepresented the Texans, and also the sample also overrepresented some specific demographic classes, such as there are way more females and there are way more bachelor degrees holders. And the the survey results underrepresented some other categories, such as men who did not complete high school or the males 18 to 21 years old. So what they did is they made some adjustment. The survey sample proportions in like 120 categories, because they calculated 120 categories using, you have 2 gender based, 5 age based, so 5 age groups, and 6 education groups, and there was another group, basically whether the respondent is Texan or not, because Texan was dominant in this group of respondents. And they scaled the responses using the 2013 American Community Survey. They published a public use macro data sample, and the scale factors published from that article were used as person level weights to unbiased person-related summary statistics and model-based parameter estimates. And then they also did something adjustment because some household groups were under or overrepresented. The household weights were calculated for 130 categories. They calculated those categories using 4 different household size groups, 4 household groups, workers groups, and 5 vehicle ownership groups, and also a question like household is in Texas or not. So they scaled that respondents as well. And these household weights were used to remove bias from household-related model estimates and the summary statistics. So a little bit of their result right here. So from this chart, it looks better. Most Americans, or more than 50.4% of Americans, were comfortable with their vehicle transmitting information to other vehicles. Roughly 42% were comfortable sending the information to the vehicle manufacturer. There are 36% of the Americans are comfortable in sending information to insurance companies, and about 33% of the Americans were comfortable sending the information to a toll operator. And we have about 62% of respondents were willing to trust the technology companies with production of well-designed autonomous vehicles. And roughly 49% of the respondents were willing to trust the luxury vehicle manufacturers with production of well-designed autonomous vehicles. And then the mass market manufacturers were, at the third place, only 45% of the respondents were comfortable or trust those mass market manufacturers to with the production of well-designed AVs. And there are probably 7.9% of respondents did not trust any company to manufacture the autonomous vehicle at all. So that was, the survey was conducted in 2015, and every year with the technology, with the more and more AVs, EVs on the road, people, their opinion are changing. So I'm sure if a new survey is conducted today, those numbers might change a little bit. And they looked at 8 different scenarios with technology price dropping from 5% and 10% annually. That's their assumption. So assuming the technology, this is based on our experience. Any new technology comes to the market, they're quite expensive. But as the technology matures, the price usually will drop. So they assume the technology price will drop like 5% and 10% annually. And also they consider the increments of willingness to pay will increase from 0% to 5% and to 10% annually, just to see how things will change, which is also pretty easy to understand. Just relate to our personal experience. When something is brand new, just coming into the market, a lot of people are hesitant to buy it. So the willingness to pay probably is not very high. But as the technology becomes more and more popular and mature, more and more people are willing to pay. And also they consider different government regulations using the same survey data we talked about earlier. They forecasted the privately held light duty vehicle fleet will have like 24.8% of level 4 AV penetration by 2045, assuming that annual 5% of price drop and WTP remains constant. And they compared this with the number will change to 87% if we consider a 10% of annual rate drop and a 10% of annual rise in willingness to pay values. So this sort of like, just give you some idea how the things can change depending on those parameters. And they conclude that adoption of CAVs really depend on the willingness to pay, the policy change, and the reductions in technology costs. Another study conducted by Littman, they examined the previous vehicle technologies and provide realistic predictions of autonomous vehicle development and deployment. Based on their research, it's predicted that AVs will be reliable by 2025, commercially available by 2030, and it may become affordable by 2050. Their research also included projections for the sales of CAV fleet composition and CAV travel percentages. So from their findings, by as early as 2040, CAVs could comprise 1/5 of our nation's vehicle fleet. So here is sort of like a chart, illustrates the market penetration and benefits prediction. From the chart, we can see it probably will be 2045 before half of new vehicles are autonomous. And we have to wait until 2060 before half of the vehicle fleet is autonomous, and possibly longer due to technical challenges or consumer preferences. Level 4 autonomy, which is able to operate autonomously under limited conditions such as grade separated highways, can reduce driver stress and increase productivity. But most benefits will require level 5 autonomy, which is to be able to operate autonomously under all normal conditions. So vehicles can transport non-drivers and travel empty to pick up or drop off the passengers. So at the end of their study, they concluded that the adoption of CAVs can be affected by the following factors. First, they concluded it depends on the speed of technological development, which makes sense, right? And then testing and regulatory approval also will play a significant role. The incremental costs, consumer travel and housing preferences, and development practices, service quality and affordability, as well as public policies, all those can affect the adoption of the CAVs. Intel Corporation Strategic Analytics, they conducted a study and they estimated the economic effects of autonomous vehicles will total $7 trillion in 2050, just based on the assumption that fully automated level 5 vehicles will be available by that time. They also suggested that mobility as a service will replace owning cars, and the transportation companies will use autonomous driving services, resulting in a change in business models. So mobility as a service is the integration of various forms of transport services into a single mobility service accessible on demand. So simply put this way, the mobility as a service offer the commuters value by adding through the use of a single application to provide access to mobility with a single payment channel instead of multiple ticketing and payment operations. So a mobility as a service operator or aggregate various forms of transport mode, whether it's a bus or metro or private operators like a ride hailing like the Uber or Lyft and taxi ride sharing onto the platform and presented on a single interface for the user. So a successful mobility as service, the mobility as a service also brings new business models and ways to organize and operate the various transport options. The magazine, the governing magazine, they conducted a survey of 25 largest US cities, and they found that the revenue could be affected by the proliferation of the autonomous vehicles. So from their survey result, nearly $5 billion were collected from parking-related activities from those 25 largest US cities. And camera and traffic citations, gas taxes, towing expenses, vehicle registration, and licensing fees from those cities in fiscal year 2016, which amounts to about $129 per capita for all those 25 largest cities. The impact of revenue loss caused by the introduction of AVs could be very different with those smaller jurisdictions. So we're talking about the size of the cities, the large city versus a smaller city, the impact could be different. And that relies significantly on parking or traffic enforcement revenue. Small cities heavily rely on parking and traffic enforcement revenues. And they might experience the biggest revenue hits comparing with the larger cities. So estimates of just how much city revenues may eventually diminish depending on like which city we're talking about. Cities identified as most likely to incur the steepest revenue losses in the analysis were densely populated places where parking comes at a premium. We probably all have experience if you go to our large city, parking in downtown area could be very, very expensive. Those reporting the highest related revenue per capita, including San Francisco, that's right, like for San Francisco is about $512 per capita. Washington, D.C. is about $502. Chicago is $248. So clearly, those have an impact. Most big cities, they maintain large and diverse enough revenue streams to absorb such hits to their budgets because they have different, some other ways. They don't solely rely on the parking fees or traffic violations. But for smaller cities, they impact on them will be much more severe. In their survey, the smaller cities' parking revenues and all types of legal fines, court fees, and forfeiture of deposits totaled more than 10% of their general revenues. So to them, it is a really big deal. Another study examined a variety of funding methods in the era of electric vehicles and concluded that the introduction of EVs has a significant impact on the traditional sources of funding for the transportation system. So for instance, motor fuel taxes range from 29% to 60% of state revenue. More than half of the states introduced an additional annual registration fees, specifically on EVs or electric vehicles. And that has raised some concerns. For instance, the electric vehicle registration fees do not currently make a significant contribution to transportation revenue, and the fee in some states is greater than the equivalent amount of taxes paid by similar gasoline-fueled vehicles. So from their study, they concluded that the states should really coordinate the relevant agencies to create an equitable user-pay revenue system or stream form. Borchsetter studied the competitiveness of the cost structure and conclude that public transportation needs to have demand bundled to larger units in order for it to remain economically competitive. Their research found that shared fleets may not be the most efficient alternative, and a substantial shared vehicle may remain in private possession and use due to their low variable costs. So that's kind of interesting finding. Grow and Stanford, in their 2016 research, found that autonomous operation affects the mode choices and the broader transportation system. They conducted 3 scenarios with different behavior responses to the availability of the AVs, and their results showed that some of the outcomes could lead to a potential increase in energy consumption and emissions. And they talked about possible policy interventions to address those concerns. Another study by Bensel and Nockman and the NO Center of Transportation, they considered 3 CAV technologies adoption scenarios. One is the slow adoption. The adoption of CAV technology follows mostly along in the business as usual, with minimal use of new technology, very, very slow. The median adoption, this scenario assumes a mix of adoption in which some of the technologies are adopted very quickly while there is a slow ramp up of other types of CAV technology. So we're talking about different type of autonomous technologies. Some are pretty quickly adopted, others are fairly slow. And the last scenario, the rapid adoption support, more like optimistic scenario. This scenario assumes a rapid ramp up of CAV technology, resulting in fundamental changes to the transportation revenues. So this is assuming all those autonomous technologies will be adopted. So here's sort of like a summary of 3 different scenarios and the impact on the revenue. So in terms of modal fuel taxes, with the slow adoption, the change or the impact on modal fuel taxes are incur small changes, and medium adoption will have a medium change. The rapid adoption will have a very large change on the modal fuel taxes, and the sales and use tax, tolling, parking fees, moving violations. So it's based on that study. This is the summary. Clements and Nockman studied the economic effect of CAVs in the United States across 13 industries and the overall economy. And their study concluded that CAVs will have an impact on the number of vehicle purchase, personal transport, group travel, and auto repair, traffic police, medical, insurance, and the legal services, with the most affected industry being the automobile industry, which makes sense. So automobile industry has the most is most affected, and other related industry will also be affected. CAVs will have economic impacts of about $1.2 trillion or $3,800 per American per year, based on their study. They also estimated that overall automotive market will likely expand as the vehicle distance traveled, or some other study using vehicle miles traveled, increases as more people can use CAVs without physically driving them. That seems a common theme. Most researchers believe that with the adoption of CAVs, there will be more people driving. Mayers and Sticks examined the various ways CAVs could be adopted in Massachusetts area. They consider private vehicles, public transit, and ride-sharing services over time, and describe 2 major trends that will have impact on the revenue. The first is the increase the vehicles mile traveled, or VMT, will increase, and the other one is the demand for parking will decrease. Peterson and Lewis studied the CAV revenue implications for the Tri-Med area, the 3 metropolitan area in Portland, Tigard, and Tualatin. They considered 3 different impact levels, 10%, 50%, and 90% of those CAVs adopted. and looked at the number of autonomous vehicles operating on the freeway and studied the projections for the future revenues. Fox conducted a study on the direct tax effect on revenue in Tennessee. So the direct tax revenues in Tennessee are linked to the sale of the fuel, which including the gasoline tax, motor fuel tax, and the gasoline inspection taxes. The vehicle stock, which include the motor vehicle registration tax, motor vehicle title fees, and the electric vehicle fees. The sale of vehicles, which include the sales tax and a few other sources. Tennessee taxes a lot of different components of the traditional transportation systems. Fox stated that the introduction of electric vehicles, electric autonomous vehicles, could decrease nearly all of these tax bases. And those revenue loss depends on obviously the EV adoption rate, the replacement of internal combustion engine vehicles with electric vehicles, the number of vehicles required to meet demand, and Tennessee's tax structure. Now, the employment losses because of the introduction of autonomous vehicles can be considered as an indirect impact on the Tennessee tax revenues. So what they recommended is that the state of Tennessee should track the employment and the vehicle stock and develop appropriate policies. And they suggested a few of them. They can make a regulatory policy change, worker transition, workforce preparation, infrastructure, tax policy, and public service delivery. So in terms of tax transportation services, states should or could tax transportation services rather than the inputs to transportation, such as vehicles and fuel, particularly if most services are delivered via fleet-owned autonomous vehicles. And also, states can consider impose like VMT, tax the VMT vehicle miles traveled. States could impose a tax on all vehicle miles traveled, regardless of whether via autonomous vehicle or traditional transportation modes. So a VMT tax will represent a more significant transformation in state taxation and could be tied to the phasing out of or immediate elimination of fuel taxes, which we mentioned will have a significant impact by the adoption of the CAVs. Congestion charges can be another way. Congestion costs can be internalized by imposing higher prices or tolls during the peak times. So there are a lot of fleet companies that have already adopted an incentive to internalize congestion costs by charging users higher prices during the peak usage times to account for the longer time spent in travel and the access to the services. The states can also have an option of imposing a congestion charge to use the road in peak times and charge consumers for the externalities imposed on other users. So they concluded states right now still have a window to reform their tax structures before the transitions. So the earlier you make the tax reform, the easier it will be in terms of the impact on their revenue. Larson conducted a study. They used the data from Texas to study the equity impact of 4 VMT fee scenarios with the assumption that the VMT fee would replace the state gas tax. We mentioned that with the adoption of CAVs, the gas tax will receive a significant impact. So in their study, they assumed that the VMT, the vehicle miles traveled fee, will replace the gas tax. And they considered different scenarios, specifically 4 different scenarios. Scenario 1 in their study is to establish a flat per mile VMT fee that generate a similar amount of net revenue as the amount already collected in Texas currently through the state tax, gas tax. So this scenario, it will not increase the funds currently generated through the state tax, gas tax. It could be used as a tool to familiarize the drivers with the concept of a VMT fee because people are not used to it. So this is a scenario number 1, basically using a flat VMT fee to replace the gas tax. Scenario 2 in their study, they also use flat VMT fee, but they use this fee for added revenue. So similar to scenario 1, establish a flat per mile VMT fee. However, rather than simply generating revenue similar to the gas tax, this scenario examines the collection of the additional revenue needed to reach the infrastructure and the mobility goals. And scenario 3 was designed to develop a VMT fee system that would encourage the use of fuel-efficient vehicles. Initially, vehicles with fuel economy less than the median fuel economy were charged a VMT fee of 2 cents per mile. Vehicles with fuel economy between the median value and the mean value were charged a VMT fee of 1.5 cents per mile. And vehicles with fuel economy greater than the mean value were charged a VMT fee of 1 cent per mile. So there's an incentive there. The last scenario they considered is sort of like they treated the urban and rural differently. So in their study, they found that the vertical equity of all proposed VMT fee scenarios and that of the current state gas tax was similar, while most of VMT fee scenarios were more horizontally equitable than the current state tax, gas tax. And they concluded the adoption of CAVs, depending on the public opinions of those technology, and may result in the need of the tolling policies. Another study by Bensel and Ockman, they surveyed 1,088 Texans about their opinion on smart vehicle technologies and related decisions, and reported that the Texans are willing to pay. WTP is also a very important metric. Texans are willing to pay $2,910, $4,607, $7,589, and $127 for level 2, 3, 4 automation and connectivity, respectively, on average. So the results from the survey showed that affordability and equipment failure are among Texas' top 2 concerns regarding the autonomous vehicles. They conducted a regression analysis and they adopted ordered appropriate models to facilitate the forecasting of the long-term adoption of the CAV technology. The results indicate that more experienced licensed drivers had a higher willing to pay, and older people had lower values with all automation technology. This probably confirms what we would expect to see from a survey like that. New tolling mechanisms, such as auction-based tolls, will come into effect with the introduction of CAVs. So in their study about a survey in Virginia to examine the public perception of auction-based tolling systems, and they found that the auction-based tolling system was well received among those familiar with the current tolling methods. And the results revealed that descending price tolling method could yield higher average toll rates and generate at least 70% more revenue when travel time saving is 30 minutes and improving capacity utilization of the toll road significantly compared to a fixed toll. So this is sort of like a descending price auction. The toll operator has 2 purposes. One of these is to provide a certain level of service by maintaining free flow speed on toll road. So to do that, the toll operators will accept the vehicles on the toll road based on the available capacity. The second is to maximize the revenue. So the toll operator can do that by sorting the accepted bids in descending orders and accept only the highest ones based on the desired capacity levels. So that's sort of like an action-based tolling system. Adler reviewed the transport-related taxes and expenditures of selected OECD countries. OECD are the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is an international organization that works to build better policies for better lives. So they found selected OECD countries and discussed the implication of autonomous connected electric shared vehicles for public finance. So they found the introduction of ACES in OECD countries will result in significant revenue loss to government revenue as fuel and vehicle taxation are 5 to 12% of federal and up to 30% of local tax revenues. They proposed the implementation of tailored public finance policies, such as introduction of road tolls in line with the user pays and the pollute pays principles, and adopt innovation in taxation schemes. So by now, you probably can draw the conclusion, whether it's domestic or international, there's some kind of consensus in terms of the impact of the CAVs on the revenue, and the proposed solutions also have something in common. So Lippmann offers another way to conceptualize how CAV will alter transportation revenue yield. This table, adapted from their research, demonstrates several ways in which the CAVs will impact transportation and the associated revenue by travel type. So, for instance, if we look at the freight trucks, the AV impacts are particularly suitable for long-haul freight travel due to its high labor costs and limited routes, mostly on grade separated highways. And in terms of the revenue impacts, there are less consumption of diesel fuels due to platooning and other more efficient forms of automated truck travel. And then you can look at different types, like small commercial versus public transport, things like that. Fox studied the direct and indirect effects of autonomous vehicles on state tax revenue. So we mentioned that direct effects of autonomous vehicles, including sales tax on vehicle purchases, registration fees and license, fuel taxes, and tolls. Those are the revenue impacts of taxes from transportation-related activities. Those are direct effect. Indirect effect will include other taxes such as the individual and the corporate income taxes, because employment will also be affected. And in their study, Fox studied the direct effects of AV on tax revenue for 6 states: California, New Hampshire, New York, Ohio, Tennessee, and Texas. And they conclude that the revenue losses depend on the characteristic of AVs and the tax structure of the state. They found that the revenue losses vary depending on specific characteristic of AV. For instance, are we talking about electric vehicles? Are we talking about shared? Are we talking about complete driverless? That has a significant impact on the revenue loss. And also depending on that particular state's tax structure, does that state rely on fuel tax revenue? And if you heavily rely on that, you will endure larger losses for sure. And the speed of adoption of CAV, they found that the adoption of the CAV does not change the ultimate revenue losses, but it will have an impact on how rapidly states feel them. So again, the point there is the state that takes action early, reform their tax structure, probably will have an easier time later on. So here is the table to summarize their findings from the 6 states with different adoption scenarios, and the numbers representing the vehicle share of the revenue. So for instance, the scenario 1 shows California losing more than 3/5 of vehicle tax revenue contributions as the autonomous vehicles are fully phased in by 2040, and the vehicle revenue actually declines over the 15 years. So you can see different scenarios there. I'm going to skip that. So they suggested the states to reform transportation-based tax structures, and they provided 3 options there. For instance, do the transportation services impose the VMT tax and the congestion charges. Now, specifically, what we talked so far are mainly other states, states other than North Carolina, and international applications. But the North Carolina Department of Transportation expected to have levied approximately $5.3 billion of revenue according to their unaudited financial report in 2020. And the largest share of the revenue comes from the motor fuel tax, $2.1 billion. And as we can see before from other states' experience, so North Carolina is going to have a significant impact on their revenue, because the revenue comes, 40% of the revenue comes from motor fuel tax. The next largest share comes from the federal funded resources at over 1.4 billion. And the highway use tax is third. And the remainder of the revenue comprised of the licenses, title fees, and other sources. So here's the pie chart for that. So in their report on the readiness of North Carolina for CAV systems, Kimberly Horn Associates described the various issues facing the state as it prepares to allow CAVs to be tested. Mainly, they're focusing on the law and the statutes, and those that needs to be changed. So certain laws and statutes would need to be changed to even allow more precise wording surrounding the CAVs. And most laws require driver to take control from the vehicle, and CAVs will be different. So driver's education will also be re-evaluated. Lastly, they look at the impact of insurance regarding the adoption of CAV. So basically, those are 3 categories. Infrastructure projects in North Carolina have quick and positive economic impacts. The impact are wide-ranging from business that can be accessed easily to drivers who save time by traveling on the new road. By using CAVs to create a more efficient existing infrastructure, the benefits described in that study can also be maximized. So while we realizing there's a great economic impact of CAVs, could bring some positive influences in North Carolina, the Department of Transportation and other agencies should prepare for the shift in the sources of revenue. So this is why we want to review other literature and experience from other states, because the earlier the changes can be made, the easier the state can adjust to the adoption of the CAVs. So we're trying to provide recommendation to the state in terms of what could be done. So for instance, here's a summary of possible ways to phase out the motor fuel tax. In the interest of time, I'm actually skip this one. So NCDOT spends nearly $5 billion every year in funding to improve North Carolina infrastructure. This results in positive economic change for the state. CAV will also result in positive economic and environmental impacts for North Carolina and its residents. So we mentioned that. Here is the graph to show the North Carolina direct employment supported by transportation construction market. So to summarize, we reviewed different articles, reports from states other than North Carolina, international, as well as within North Carolina. Specifically, we looked at two important documents, NC First Commission Report and NC Moves 2050. So understanding the extent to which the motor fuel taxes receipts and other state funding sources are expected to change is a key focus for this research. So our literature review found very interesting things so far. The NC First Commission recently released the key findings and a summary report highlighting the important financial issues confronting our state's transportation system. So this is a key takeaway from the NC First Commission demonstrating the disruptive power of electric vehicles. The chart shows three scenarios of electric vehicle adoption in North Carolina, the base case, the low case, and the high case scenario. Based on the projection, we can see that North Carolina's roads will transport 200,000 to 350,000 electric vehicles. That's a very large jump from the 25,000 electric vehicles on our road today. So the findings from this NC First Commission report will be used to help us to build our CAV revenue models. The NC Moves report is another very important document we're studying. And it was developed to assist the NCDOT and its partners with a variety of uncertainties and respond to state and federal requirements focused on transportation, resiliency, equity, accessibility, and performance. So here, there are a variety of other literature sources that will help us to build our revenue model. This one, we briefly mentioned this before. This is the study conducted by Fox. They studied direct and indirect effects of autonomous vehicles on state tax revenue. This includes the effects of CAV on motor fuel taxes, sale taxes, purchase registration fees, and so on and so forth. They concluded the direct effects of CAVs on tax revenue for 6 states from California, New Hampshire, New York, Ohio, Tennessee, and Texas. So we're going to use this study also as a base to build our CAV revenue model. So in this chart, you can see that Fox estimates that Texas would generate $21 billion in transportation revenue if no CAVs were adopted, and would experience revenue losses from 4 to 59.5% when comparing revenue in 2040 to revenue in 2025, based on the adoption rate and the reduction rate of older vehicles for CAV models. So like I mentioned, we are going to use this study as well when we build our models. And we talked about this particular study already. And this is another sources for our model building. So far we reviewed a lot of literatures, both outside North Carolina, inside North Carolina, and from the international community. We studied the impact of adoption of CAVs, the adoption rate forecast, and the significant factors that might change the revenue on the state. And we are building our parameters and considering various assumptions, developing the guideposts, and try to generate, collecting the data to build our revenue model. So our next step is to build various models, consider different scenarios to study the impact, revenue impact of a CAV on, in North Carolina. Sorry, I kind of went over a little time. So any questions?
Great, thank you. It was very informative and comprehensive survey. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So any questions? Okay, while others are warming up, so just for me, one question. So a lot of these researchers are, from my understanding, I might be wrong, or you may have already presented, but doesn't distinguish so much between the three jumps, if I call it, transitioning from current technologies to EV, and then from EV to AV, and then from AV to CAVs, right? So it's a little bit keep it vague on that side, and then I mean, how each of these jumps may impact differently, and how that impact would be. Maybe because all of these are happening almost at the same time, that's why it's not worth of distinguishing them. Just wanted to know your perspective. How do you think about these three jumps?
Right. We are actually considering that. So the way we're considering that is we consider different scenarios. And then we're gonna also, because some of the data actually, the more recent data that we acquire has, kind of contradict from what we learned so far. But what we're saying is we'll consider, depending on the adoption rate for electrical vehicles, obviously is not a new technology anymore, but transition from EV to autonomous vehicle, that's the next transition of our focus. So the way we handle this is we'll consider the adoption rate, and also one of the things is the technology price, right? So how much a drop yearly we can expect, and then we're going to also make an assumption of the willingness to pay from North Carolinians, because that's also something will have an impact on it. So to answer your question, basically, the way we handle this is we'll just provide some kind of like different scenarios to consider the impact.
Okay. Any questions? I know it is 4:03, so maybe one more question.
Yes, sorry, I went over.
Oh no, I know that this results was really helpful to share with. So seems that there is a question in the chat box. So feel free to go ahead and ask about it.
Hey,
okay.
So I just had a quick follow-up question. So yeah, thanks for the survey. I was curious if we also expect like a lot of behavioral changes in, such as like people shifting away from just driving only more to other new emerging ways of transporting themselves. Is that also expected to change the revenue? And like, did you find anything like that in the surveys that's in the literature that stood out?
Right. So from my understanding, that the survey was done in 2015. So it's quite interesting. So the people's like behavior type of responses depending on the demographic. So as you probably can imagine, younger people are more willing to adopt a new technology versus older people are more hesitant to do that. But since there is a trend, people are willing to do like certain things like the vehicle pooling becomes a trend. And this is something that actually the researchers wanted to encourage, because obviously you don't want to like a lot of cars like with nobody in it and just right on the road to pick people up and drop people off, but that will cause the congestion and the air pollution. So the perception is a very interesting thing, because if I do a survey today, responses might be very different from yesterday, could be very different from tomorrow as well. But I would say in general, people are more and more people are willing to give CAV a chance.
Yeah.
So,
okay, but that's helpful. Yeah. I agree. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Stephen. A great presentation. Thank you very much. Very
thank you.
Informative. I just have one question. I know you have one slide talk about a research that has been done in the past to investigate the impact of a price drop of CAVs on the market share and things like that. So I'm just curious whether there's some research at this point has been done to investigate the impact of safety concerns on the market shares of CAVs.
I know safety definitely is one of the concerns from some of the research, but the papers that I read in terms of consider the scenario, I don't think they specifically singled the safety out as a factor, although I think they probably are, they should. I think they covered that by there's a metric called a willingness to pay. I think that probably kind of reflect a little bit. If a person is willing to pay for this technology, they probably consider all those things in terms of price, in terms of quality, in terms of safety. But no single, I haven't seen something they just put the safety as a single factor and study that.
I see. Thanks. Yeah.
You're welcome.
So most scenarios are based on the adoption rates. But
adoption rates is definitely one of them, and the price, the price drop is another thing that a lot of research that consider, and the policy change is another one.
Yep, that was exactly my next my question was that
Sure.
scenarios are based on the different adoption rates, but the adoption rates itself might be also a function of so many things, politics, yes, demography, or even populations and those sort of things. So what is your perspective on that side?
So the adoption rate itself obviously is very, very important. Without that, it's hard. The revenue model wouldn't be very useful. But in terms of the policy change, I think specifically definitely have a lot of impact on it. We mentioned the use of VMT. A lot of studies suggest that because this gas fuel tax, it just seems like, you know, if one day every car is autonomous vehicle and is electric, then the gas price and the gas tax is no longer existing. So the use of VMT, whether the North Carolina is considering or will consider, that will make a difference. So we're thinking about some policy, potential policy, considering the feasibility, also considering something, you know, just a possibility. We'll take those into consideration in our model development.
I see. Yep, I see a chat box if the presentation will be available, the recording will be available. Yes, in few days, the presentation will be available in CCAV website. And yep. And all past presentations are already available there. So any other, maybe last question?
The presentation, I believe, was actually attached to the original invite, but I will resend it so that everybody has it. But the presentation should have been with the original invite that was sent out, I believe, on Wednesday.
Yep, and the recording also will be available as well soon.
Yes, that'll be available next week, probably after Monday.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so with that, thank you, Dr. Jiang, again.
Thank you for the